Boy, I love that beginning. So, hello, everybody. This is
Hi.
Ron Hooper, and we also have with us
Hey, everyone. All right.
other region.
Made it.
All
Sorry,
right.
go ahead, Ron.
So, Ken Quinn, how are you today?
I'm fan-terrific, boys.
He has been just skittle-gaddle and getting everything together with all this collaboration that's happening in the network. Gremlins are alive today. So Ken, he may have lost a few hairs out of this. So we also have Ken Clark with us. I think he's joining by proxy, our Southwestern Regional Director. And our special guest today is Scott Tillman, our National Field Director. He does so much more. Scott, say hello.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
You bet. You bet. And hopefully at some point in time, we may even have Nick join us. So we're having some technical difficulties, but since we have Scott here today, we have lots of things to talk about.
Hey, Ron, let me just, first of all, thank everybody out there on Facebook for joining us. We really appreciate your support. One thing, I'm going to be kind of going in and out of the screen, and we would love if you could type in the comment sections what state you're in and give a shout out where you are. I'm going to pull those up and put them up on the screen. And then if we've got time, I know Scott is going to, I think, if he's willing, maybe take some questions from you folks out there in regards to some of the, I guess, the responses we get or they get from legislators as to why maybe they might not like the idea of term limits. But if we get there, we've got a lot to cover. I know Nick was going to join us, a little technical difficulty there. We'll have to push that back to another time, but I'm looking forward to this. So boys, take it away.
Hey, Scott, we want to really say thanks for joining us. We know that you have lots of different things going on, especially in this quarantine environment. And so we thought we'd just take a few minutes and talk a little bit, because one of the many things that you do, and you do so well, is you run really our pledge team and that whole pledge strategy. And so we have our supporters to send out to their congressmen and talk to them and their state legislators about term limits and how important. And behind the scenes, you and your part of your organization is outreaching that group all the time. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's a program that we run at U.S. Term Limits. It's called our Pledge Program, and there's actually two parts of it. One where we're asking congressional members and candidates for Congress to sign pledges, another one where we ask state legislators to sign pledges. So first, before I get into the different pledge programs, a pledge is essentially a signed promise from a legislator or a candidate. Normally they sign when they're a candidate, telling voters how they intend to vote on a specific issue when that issue comes up, and that they will support that issue coming up, or in some cases they will block that issue coming up. Probably the most well-known pledge programs out there. There was a pledge for years that circulated going way back into the 60s about nuclear proliferation.
George Bush.
About nuclear weapons and stockpiles and things like that, and asking our legislators to take a stand on de-escalating the nuclear situation. Another really popular one that has been out there is Grover Norquist has a pledge that has to deal with raising taxes. And then there are a couple of different organizations. One I think is based in the Northeast, and I can't think of the name of the organization, but they ask candidates to sign a pledge that has to deal with campaign finance and the influence of money in elections. Well, at U.S. Term Limits, we're a single issue group, and our pledge has to deal with getting term limits for Congress. So we ask members of the U.S. Congress and people who are running to be members of the U.S. Congress, so U.S. Senate and Congress, the House, to sign a pledge that they will support an amendment for a 3-House term and 2 Senate term constitutional amendment for term limits on Congress. This is not a self-limit. We're not asking them to self-limit. That would kind of be self-defeating. In the past, many have signed self-limits. But what we're focused on is getting an amendment that will apply equally to everyone. Because one of the big problems is the benefits of seniority in Congress. And if you have people leaving before we have term limits for everyone, it might be seen to disadvantage their state or their constituents. So what we ask is that they sign a pledge that will help us get a congressional term limits amendment. And currently we have 69 or 70 members of Congress who have signed that pledge. And many of them, most of them, are co-sponsors on the legislation to do that, which right now in the U.S. House is in the U.S. Senate is SJR 1, and in the U.S. House is HJR 20. Over the course of the election cycle, there's some different things that happen. We have special elections that happen. For example, there were special elections in South Carolina, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, California, a number of different House races around the country. There's a special election, or is a special election coming up in Arizona for U.S. Senate. There were some different appointments and other things. So it's not just every 2 years that we're doing these pledges. We're actually doing these pledges for Congress for all these special elections also. And what we do is we have people who work for U.S. term limits who are reaching out to candidates. We have people who are volunteers supporting U.S. term limits who are reaching out to candidates. We have people who say, I'm unable to reach out to a candidate, but I can help you get in touch with them. I've got a good email address for this candidate, or I've got a good phone number for this candidate. And they send those over to our team, and then we get a hold of the candidate, and we try to get the candidate to sign the pledge to support the amendment for term limits. Not a self-limit, but an amendment for term limits that will apply to everyone. Pledges do a couple of things. One thing, they let voters know how you're going to be on an issue. So when you're running for office, it's very good if voters know how you're going to vote on an issue. Another thing is, it takes away a lot of thinking about an issue for a candidate. If you have pledged to support something, when that comes up, there's no political horse trading or anything else that goes on. You know how you're going to be on it. The issue has become decided for you. A third thing that they're really beneficial for is when groups are supporting different legislation, like we support term limits, the pledge acts essentially as our whip count. For those of you who don't know what a whip count is, in a legislative body, there are different people in leadership, and different people have different positions. One of the people is the Speaker of the House. They have control of the floor. They control what comes up for discussion. Another position is the majority leader. So if it's Republicans in the majority leader is going to be a Republican. If it's Democrats in the majority leader is going to be a Democrat. That's not always the same as the person who's the speaker. Quite often it's different because there are responsibilities that go with both jobs. And to ask one person to do both is a bit overwhelming, depending on how much business the legislature will be addressing. But one position we hear about is the majority whip and minority whip. And what they do essentially is go around, and when legislation is going to be brought to the floor or being discussed and whatnot, they go whip votes. They essentially go around, find out where the different candidates stand on the issue, and then use different political capital to leverage them to vote for or against it, essentially whipping the representatives. And I assume, now I'm not sure, because a lot of things, the reason why we call things the things we call them in different cases, there's a lot of different reasons. I assume it's like cracking the whip.
Boy, it sounds good to me. That's the best explanation I've actually heard for that. I'm glad you brought it up, because I've heard that a lot. Yeah. So, maybe somebody has a better answer. They can text it to us or message it in. But that was the best answer I've heard.
Let me go off on a slight tangent, since I think we got just a little bit of time. With all the different things that we know majority leader makes very much sense. In a Senate, you don't normally call the Senate, the person who's been voted to lead from the Senate, you don't normally call him the Senate Speaker. In a lot of places, in the U.S. Senate, it's the Vice President is essentially the Speaker of the Senate. They call it the President of the Senate. But then in other states, they don't even call it the President of the Senate. A lot of times it's called the Majority Leader. It's just the person who has the popular support of everybody. An interesting one is we use the term caucus, and they use the term caucus in Washington, D.C., and they use the term caucus in most every state. When they go and talk about when the party gets together behind closed doors, they caucus. And at the same time, sometimes there are caucuses that are going on in the states. The term caucus actually comes from New England. There were guys who would caulk the boats, and they would do, when they were doing the shipbuilding and whatnot, they would go, and they were called a caucus. With that, where they drop the R's in Maine and Boston and places like that. And they had a great big area where they would do their work. So when they needed to have a big town discussion and to discuss this thing, they would go down to the caucus, where the caucus did their work. And that has since now become a term that is associated with how the party goes, things going on at the party behind closed doors. But it comes from people caulking seams in ships, sailing ships. So there's a lot of different. That's kind of a sidelong thing. But getting back to pledges.
Well, no,
So,
that's actually good stuff because I've heard that term too. So now I've got an answer when somebody asks me at a party. So I can, well, if we ever do have a party again, I hope that will happen in the near term. But at least I've got like 2 subjects we can discuss. So these pledges, Scott. So are they effective? Do they really keep the legislators in line?
very much so. And the biggest reason why is because no legislator wants to be seen as breaking their pledge. So pledges work both with supporters and opponents to a legislator. A lot of people might not support something that a legislator takes a pledge for. So the best example of this is there are people who might not support taking a tax limitation pledge or a no spending increase or a no tax increase pledge, but they respect that a person would put that down, and they will turn on a person who breaks a pledge. So for organizations, getting a pledge is very, very important. It gives us a good whip count so that we know who is in support of, and then that way we can go out and educate our supporters, because we have a lot of supporters. And aside from those supporters, coming to us directly and saying, well, where do you think this person is on this issue? And a person, there's a joke that says, how do you know a politician is lying? Their lips are moving. Jokes are jokes because there's a lot of truth involved, or there's at least some truth. That one, there is a lot of truth involved. And making them put pen to paper and actually promise something is a lot more effective in a campaign. And it's a lot more effective with voters trusting them than just a person saying something. So we go out and we get these pledges, and those pledges count for a lot with the voters.
Well, and, as you see, we put out a tremendous amount of press. And we really promote the fact that they sign our term limits pledge. Do we promote candidates?
So we do. What we do is when a candidate signs a pledge, U.S. term limits, we don't endorse candidates. But what we do is if you support term limits, we do our best to let term limit supporters around the country know your position on term limits. And we know from polling across the country, across party lines, that term limits polls between 75 and 80% consistently. In some places, it polls even higher than 80%. And that doesn't mean that it's an 80-20 issue. No, it's an 89, it's an 80-10 issue. There's a big, there's always a big undecided group in any poll. And when you talk term limits, what you're talking about when you have a 75 to 80% issue, you're talking about the opposition being between 8 and 12% opposed. And that is consistent and has been consistent going back to the early 90s. That is very much the way that it has been. If anything, support has grown in places that have term limits like Michigan. Support is increased for term limits, and they're more popular now than they were when they first passed. And that carries over in all states with term limits, and it carries over nationally on the idea for term limits on Congress. Sorry, let me turn my phone off. I thought I had my ringer off.
Well, it's increasing, and it's increasing across both parties. We did a recent poll in Arizona, and the Republicans have always been supportive, but now all of a sudden our growth is in Democrats and independents, and they went up over 5%. And when we show that to the groups, I mean, it's just, there is nothing that has that kind of popularity that term limits has. It's amazing that we get any pushback at all. Why would they not sign our pledge, Scott?
Well, remember when I mentioned that it kind of takes away the iffiness for a candidate? They know where they're going to be on an issue. For candidates who have been in office before, a lot of times they think that there's a value in being able to do horse trading on the floor and trade on their position, support for one thing versus, to get support for something else that they would like to do. So some politicians won't sign for that reason. Other politicians have been told different things about term limits, but for the most part, politicians don't like the idea of having their power limited. And when you talk about term limits, what you're saying is, your power is going to be sunsetted. You're going to be out of office no matter how many times you get elected. At a certain point, you will be done. And it's kind of human nature. People don't like to give up control. So there is some pushback on that. But once we go through and we show legislators and candidates the support of the issue, then it just becomes they can't argue with the fact that it has such overwhelming support. So after that, they come up with different creative reasons why they might oppose. But for the most part, it's just a matter of us being able to get to them and ask them enough times. So when we do ask somebody for pledge, very rarely does a candidate sign the pledge the first time we're asked. It's not like we can send out an email or a piece of mail. It gets to their house, and then everybody who's going to sign the pledge signs it, and we get them back. That doesn't happen. We do send out mail, and we do send out email asking candidates to sign the pledge. But then we follow it up with phone calls. And we normally have to follow it up with several phone calls, not just because we don't get a hold of the person on the first try, but often because we have to have multiple conversations with the person before they get comfortable and are willing to sign the pledge. And we show them what we do. We show them the press releases that we put out in favor of to show our supporters and to show what candidates support term limits. We show them different social media things that we post that will appear in their our state pages in their states, as well as our national page, and then our Twitter feed, and then we of course tag them, and it goes across there. So it's a nice thing to see that this candidate supports term limits, and we make sure that we get the word out to our supporters, as well as get the word out to the greater universe of voters in general. And we know that 8 out of 10 voters are supporting our issues. So it's valuable for this information to get out there in front of the voters. And
that the new candidates are the ones that kind of seek us out to sign the term limits, because they realize, and of course they haven't been elected yet. So, and then after, we've got a couple in Arizona that's kind of wishy-washy on their pledges that they signed, but they were the ones that seeked us out to begin with. So it's kind of funny how that progresses in time after they've been actually elected in office, and they can see that sunset.
Hey guys, do you want me to show you where the pledges are so people out there can see how to find it on our website?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah, let me pull this up. I've been kind of scrolling through some of the pledge signers. So let me just change the screen here, and let me just make this So if you go to our website, every day we have new pledge signers. These are the press releases that our digital team puts out. And this is what we're talking about. So as Scott and Ron were talking about the different pledges, we have a congressional pledge and a state legislator pledge. If you go to term limits, and it is the second one down. So just click on that. Let me show you where you can find the pledge. And folks, try not to type too much stuff in the comments. That really messes things up for me on this end. So just kind of keep it to one short sentence. I would really appreciate that. So if you scroll down a little bit, I'm going to show you just the pledge for state legislators, which is that top right. And here is what we are asking people to send to their legislators and candidates for state office. Here it comes. Can you see it on your end at this point? Okay. So that's the pledge. It just states that I, John Smith, pledge that as a member of the state legislature, I will co-sponsor, vote for, and defend the resolution applying for an Article 5 convention for the sole purpose of enacting term limits on Congress. All right, Jim, I just want to show that. So let me bring you back in.
Ken, keep your screen up if you can. I'd like you to show us a couple of other things. If you go up to the bar at the top of the U.S. Term Limits website, you'll see there's let me pull it up on my screen so I can talk accurately. You can actually see a list of signers.
Yeah, let me show you the state. So the third one down is state legislator pledge signers. This is really good. So if you want to see who in your state has signed, click on here. And this gets updated pretty much every week, I believe.
These are incumbent legislators who have signed. For candidates who have signed, you're going to want to go to your state Facebook page, U.S. Term Limits. If you put in your state name and term limits, it will pop up, and then you'll be able to find all of our posts on different candidates who have signed. We've had a really boom year for pledges. We're ramping up with the pledge team. We've got several people who are doing it full time, and we've got a lot of volunteers who are helping with research on candidate information, as well as going to town halls with pledges to ask legislators to sign them, contacting legislators on the phone, contacting legislators on Facebook, contacting legislators through email, asking them, and I say legislators, but candidates also. One handicap of a pledge program is you have to get the pledge in front of the candidates, and we can do so much, but as everybody knows who've ever gone to their mailbox or who has ever checked their email after being gone for a week, a lot of stuff stacks up, and it's very easy for things to get missed and trashed or overlooked in emails. And it's very easy for, as you're standing over the trash can after you went to the mailbox, to just be throwing things away. And if it doesn't have a hand addressed whatever, oftentimes they end up in the circular file there. We need help with volunteers asking their legislators, and there's ways you can do it through our website. You can also contact us on Facebook and on our website, and you can go on the website and get our phone number and contact us directly. If you have access to a candidate, we would love to put the pledge in your hand, and then at the same time as you're asking them and you're getting the pledge in front of them, we will ask them also. Because I've done this for several years, and what I find is the most effective way to get a pledge is when a person has a personal relationship with a legislator. And the second most effective way is if multiple people are asking that legislator. So if somebody from U.S. term limits as well as a constituent are asking, we get pledges that come in that way very quickly, very reliably, and it's probably the highest impact way that we can do it, other than if you have a personal relationship with the legislator. So I know we had several volunteers in Kentucky asking for pledges from their state legislative candidates this week, and sure enough, we followed those up with a call from a person from U.S. term limits, and in a couple of cases the pledges came through without a follow-up call, and in the other cases the follow-up call really primes the pump and gets the legislators, putting pen to paper.
And boy, that's the one thing, I got a real nice letter from a lady from Oregon. I won't mention her name, but I get nice letters from her from time to time. And she wanted to know what more she could do during this epidemic and her quarantine, and that's one thing. And she thought she had reached out to them before. She said, is it okay for me to reach out to them again? And I said, yes, please. So if you've done it once or twice before, please go back and do it again. You can go in there. We'll find the legislator for you and send them an email or give them a call. And then you can imagine the power of that, having a local constituent contact them and then have Scott's team follow up with a phone call. You can imagine how effective that is.
Hey, let me share what we're doing in Pennsylvania. So we're training county captains in Pennsylvania, and we've got a call to action that I just completed. And it has 3 steps to it. So the county captain is going to reach out to our supporters that have already taken action on previous calls to action, and is going to call that person and walk them through this call to action. And it allows them to send a message that they will write themselves and send it. And then a few days later, if they don't get a response back, then they're going to go to that legislator's Facebook page and publicly on their comment section ask the same question. Hey, do you support our resolution? And will you sign the pledge? If that doesn't work, if we don't get a response by that time, then the third option is the county captain is going to call with the constituent, that legislator, and on the phone together, they're going to have a conversation, hopefully with the legislator, if not at least with the staff person, to make the request.
Were you sharing something with us?
No.
Oh, good.
Well, did you hear what I said?
Yes.
We did.
No?
We
Okay.
heard that.
All right. Phew. I'm glad I wasn't talking to myself.
No.
I'd really like to have a program like that, Pennsylvania program, all over the country. It'd be great if we had people who were able to help with that, because this does take time and effort, which is, time is finite, which we all know. A lot of us have a little bit more time now with the quarantine than we did before. And a lot of us are more busy now with the quarantine than we were before. We know all our first responders are overwhelmed, and there's a few professions where any free time they had is gone for the duration, while the rest of us have a little bit more time on our hands. So if you are able and willing, please reach out to us through Facebook or through the website, and you can reach out to us at pledges@termlimits.com. There's the email address, pledges@termlimits.com, if you're willing to help, and we'll make sure that either I will follow up with you or one of our staff who's working in your area will follow up with you. We have quite a few people working around different areas of the country, and in my ideal world, we would get the pledge in front of and get responses from every person running for legislative office. And there's going to be over 10,000 people running for state legislature this year, and another 2,000 on top of that. I want to say closer to 3,000 running for Congress that actually go through and raise money and put on a serious campaign. It's almost 3,000 people. There are several thousand more who go out and do more grassroots campaigns, and I'd like to pledge in front of them also. So right now there are just so many that it's an overwhelming issue, and we've got lots of opportunity, and we need many hands to make light work of it. So if you have the time and the ability, we would really appreciate it. And it's amending the Constitution. I know it's very frustrating that we've been working on this since essentially 88, 89, when the first states started organizing state groups to put term limits on Congress. And then we got shot down by the Supreme Court in 1995. And then we've worked on self-limit pledge programs. And now we're working on an Article 5 program because we finally figured out that there was no way to really leverage Congress without bringing some leverage from the states. So it's very frustrating. But, our Constitution is a strong document, and it's a good basis and protection for our rights because it's difficult to amend and because it's difficult for the government or for the people to change that. And it shouldn't be easy. We want it to be difficult to amend, and we want it to be worthwhile to amend it. So amending the Constitution is a big job. We know that our issue has 80% support, 75, 80% support. We're a popular issue. It's just a matter of mobilizing in a way where we can, bring our strength to bear and actually muscle this through. That's what we're trying to do. We've got the plan outlined. We're working on it, and it's just a matter of getting the support and getting the assistance to push it through.
And you can go right into our volunteer page, by the way, if you haven't gone in and signed up under the volunteer page. And there's actually a tab down there that says you can help us get pledges. So when you go in there, we don't know about you until you go in and register. And once you go in there and register, and if you've got 1 hour a week, we can get a lot of stuff done in 1 hour a week. So if you're willing to put any time at all, please go in, register. It goes to the regional directors. We'll reach out to you, figure out how your best and highest skill sets are, and make sure that we take advantage of that 1 hour that you got a week.
So for everybody who's living in the United States who's on this call, there are at least 4 people that I could put you in touch with that we likely need a pledge from, and likely probably a dozen people that we need a pledge from. There are your state rep, your state senator, candidates who are running to be your state rep this year, candidates running to be your state senator this year, or who will be running to be your state senator in 2 years, the person who is running to be your U.S. senator, and the candidates that are running to be your U.S. congressman. There are multiple people running to those offices when they're up. You might not have a state senator or a U.S. senator up this year. You might not have your state senator up this year, but you do absolutely have a representative, and you do absolutely have a congressman up, unless you're in a state that has odd year elections for your state legislature, but there's only 5 of them, so chances are you aren't. But if people will be running for that office later this year for next year's cycle, so I can still find them. We have lots of people that we need to be in contact with. And if you know somebody, if you're uncomfortable contacting with them, or maybe you know them and you're like, if I ask them, they ain't gonna give it to me, because sometimes people are like, well, if somebody other than Scott Tillman asks me, maybe I'll consider it. But every once in a while, you have a relationship like that with somebody. If there's a person that you're uncomfortable asking, but you can help us find good contact info for that person, a good cell phone number, a good email address for that person, those things are hard to find. If you don't change your email address, and I don't change the email address very often, but it turns out a lot of people do. I've had the same email address since I was 26 years old, and I'm 43 now. And I've had the same cell phone number since 2001. But when I look at statistics, most people are changing their cell phone numbers every 2 years. And most people are changing their email address even more often than that. So if you have access to a candidate, if you have an email address, if you have a cell phone number, if you have a home phone number for a candidate or somebody who's in touch with a candidate, we would love to talk with you. We would love to, get that information so we can get a hold of them. We're not going to put them in a list and spam them with robocalls. It will be a real person on the phone calling them. It will be a real person emailing them. We're going to reach out one-to-one. We don't just plug people into a system and turn on a machine to crank out the touches. No. The reason why this is so hard and why it takes so much effort is because there's a person on the phone when we're calling legislators, and there's a person on the other end of the email who's actually writing that email and saying, this is an issue important to your constituents. They want to know where you are on this issue. Where are you on this issue? And then following that up with a phone call.
So the availability of the legislators right now, especially with the quarantine, we have their legislative numbers and phone numbers and emails, but you got to get past that part. And that's why
a lot of them are home right now. A lot of them aren't in the Capitol. So we need your assistance finding ways to get in touch with them at home. We've come a long way since, the 1990s, when the phone book was delivered 3 times a year to the end of your driveway or to your door. and you'd go out there and you could find everybody, it's very hard to find contact info for people on cell phones. And thank God it is, because I don't need any more robocalls coming in. But when you're a public official, you should be reachable by your constituents. So if you do have access to a public official, please get in touch with us. And if you're uncomfortable with giving their number to us, get in touch with us and I'll get you the information so you can contact them.
Great. Well, Scott, we've really enjoyed you stepping in today. We're going to try to get you and Nick back so that you can talk to us a little bit about how you talk to legislators and how you handle some of the objections that are brought forward to us. Ken Quinn, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, great job, guys. I'm glad that went well, because I've been doing a lot of comments. I posted those pledges for people to use. So I posted the state pledge and the congressional pledge, and we got to focus on that. We need your help. This really helps coming from their constituents. And so if you could help us in any way, reach out to either me, Ron, Ken Clark, anyone on the team, and we will get right alongside you and get that in and get the press release out, because they love it. Part of my approach right now is, listen, a lot of, especially the challengers, they're not getting any press. They can't get in front of people. They're locked down. They want their name out there. And this is a great way of saying, hey, listen, most people want this. You're missing out on an opportunity to get your name out there on an issue that most voters want. So let's take advantage of it.
Yeah, this election cycle has really changed for candidates. For those of you who haven't done political campaigns before, normally you put together when you're running for office, you put together a budget and a plan. I need to raise this much money because I've got to reach my voters this many times. And the voters, you reach them through, in a huge district, through TV. But in most state house and state senate districts, you reach them through mail and you reach them through phone calls. So you put together a budget that you're going to put people in an office helping you make phone calls, and they're volunteers, but you got to have a budget to pay for pizza. You got to have a budget to pay for pop. You got to have a budget to pay for the phone system. And then you've got to do so many mailings. Well, a lot of places have delayed their primary election, which means that all those mail pieces that those legislators or candidates had budgeted to send out, thank God we won't be getting as many pieces of mail because they won't have the money for it, but they're looking for other opportunities. So really doing a program like what we're doing right now and trying to get them on something, when we can show them that we're going to give them some voter contact, that we're going to put this issue out on Facebook, we're going to put this issue out in a press release, and we're going to make sure that voters know where they stand on this issue. This is gold to them because they didn't budget for an extra 4 weeks of campaign season. For some of them who have a lot of money, it's an opportunity. But for those who, are regular folks who are running, who just want to change, the country back and change their state back to a citizen legislature model, this is a great opportunity for them. So just helping us get in front of those people is a really big help.
All right. Scott, did you say pop?
Did I say what?
Did you say pop?
Pop?
Is that soda? I'm just giving you a hard time.
Years ago, I went to Maine. The first time I'd been to Maine. I have now been to every state, but at one time there were 3 states I hadn't been to, and one of those states was Maine. And I went to Maine. I'm staying at a hotel, and I go down to the front desk, and I say to the young lady working at the front desk, where are the pop machines? I cannot for the life of me find the pop machines. And we went back and forth for a good 3-4 minutes because she didn't know what I was talking about.
That's so funny.
Finally, I said, I want to buy a Coke. I can't find a machine to buy a Coke. And she goes, you mean the soda machine? And I said, yes, the soda machine.
That's so funny.
If you're from Michigan,
yeah,
you know what pop is, but apparently not everybody does.
That's hilarious. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I think we covered the pledge push. So let's see a lot of releases next week, a lot of new pledges coming in. Everybody, we want to thank you for your time and look forward to working with you. Have a great day now. Bye-bye.
Be safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Seniors.